Thank you very much, Chair. Thank you very much for being with us today. I have to say, looking at the presentations that were made and the written work that was sent in, it's utterly depressing. As the brother of 8 sisters, the father of a daughter and the grandfather of 2 beautiful granddaughters, to think that sexual violence is the way we fight wars, the way we deal with these things, it's utterly depressing. On the positive side, as a teacher, I engaged with many Nigerian students particularly, and the work ethic that I saw from them was way above the average, and that's great. But it strikes me when we're talking about funding that the days of funding education alone is no longer a solution to the problem, because there's personal security involved. And one has an image of young women travelling to and from school and constantly in danger of being assaulted, kidnapped. I mean, 276 girls taken from a school. So it strikes me that we don't just need to fund the teachers, we need to fund secure environments, we need to fund secure transport. I'm not even sure if they should travel home, that we should be looking at some form of boarding school for safe education. So that's something I'd like you to address. Do you have any evidence today of the take-up between male and female students? I'm aware, for example, here in Ireland, among certain ethnic groups, that there is male engagement in the education system up to about the age of 16, at which stage they withdraw totally, but the females continue on. And I've seen some wonderful work among some of the ethnic groups, but mainly from females. The males seem to have departed by 16. I wonder, does that follow through when we're talking about Somalia, Nigeria and other such places? Our speaker from Somalia spoke about outcomes. And every time I hear the word outcomes, the hair on the back of my neck stands up, because as a former teacher, one of the things that really bothered me about the way EU funding in education in Ireland was going was it was based on outcomes. How many students did you take? How many modules did they study? How many did they pass? And funding would follow based on that. Whereas for some of us, to actually survive a year attending school, maybe 3 days a week rather than 5, that's a massive achievement. And over a period of time, it might take a student 3 years to achieve what another student could achieve in 1 academic year. So when I hear outcomes, and all due respects to my presenter there, the witness from Somalia, I fully understand what he's talking about, but I worry when I hear statistics, outcomes, that sort of thing. For me, it's far more important that a student would attend and start to develop an educational programme, which might take longer than 1 year or 2. And it's my experience going back to my own education days that some of the worst students I had in first year turned out to be the most dedicated students by 3rd year. And I'm talking about further education in that particular area. You mentioned the vaccine programme, and you'll be aware of the fact that we had a fairly significant debate in the Senate on the issue of vaccine equality throughout the world. I am still horrified, and it still bothers me every day, that one of the major drug companies is making $65,000 a minute on the vaccine, while we have tens of millions of people in the world who cannot be vaccinated. And I say that because I think you guys need to say that all day, every day. You need to get that out there. The animal instincts of capitalism in the case of vaccine is really and utterly sickening. The issue of Afghanistan, when we took over the UN Security Council seat, our ambassador made a statement about how we stand with the women and girls of Afghanistan. I was quite critical of that at the time, because words are easy. Words are easy to say. I just wonder, have you any knowledge as to what's happening in that part of the world? Where are we with girls, particularly girls' education? I said it before here, I cannot imagine what it must be like to be about 17, having been through the education system in Afghanistan and suddenly have it all taken away from you. Can't begin to understand it. And my final question is, multinationals who have, for the want of a better description, raped these countries of their resources, how much funding is coming from multinationals? Does anything come your way from multinationals that are involved in these areas? So, listen, thank you very much indeed, and thank you for the work you do. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Gerard. Just going back to Jane Ann, I don't see other members offering. Deputy Gannon has left for the Chamber. There are statements. But could I just say to Jane Ann that before bringing matters to a formal conclusion, and just to add to the questions of the recent members, just in relation to your opening statement, with particular reference to the SDGs and goal number 4 in particular, you state, and we have heard this before actually in the context of COVID, that the pandemic itself, and I suppose the consequent social restrictions and the economic consequences of such social restrictions have really blown the SDG targets off course. It seems to me your statement that, if you like, the last 2, one of them being the one we're dealing with today, which is goal number 4 on education, that whatever chance we had of attaining that target or reaching that target, that's really blown off course now with COVID. That means that none of the goals will have their targets reached by 2030. But just with specific reference to education, I note SDG 4 deals, if you like, not only with education, but quality education. And that word is used. So maybe before we conclude, could I ask some of your guests at the coalface just to deal with the issue of quality? Because to me, quality education means attaining a certain standard and having quality teaching and having a reasonable type infrastructure and having a class size that might be considered appropriate for the delivery of quality education. It seems that in some countries, some African countries in particular, class sizes could be, off the Richter scale as far as we're concerned here in Ireland. 100 people, 120, 130, maybe no formal hours, and maybe competing interests of a type that Eamon has said. So I suppose my question is a difficult one, but how do you see SDG 4 on the matter of quality education, coming back to some sort of realisable target for 2030, and that the developed world just doesn't engage in some hand-wringing and say, well, because of the COVID pandemic, we're not going to reach this goal. So what can we do, if you'd like, to catch up? Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Chairman. There's a few questions there. I might actually start with your question, Chairman Flanagan, with regard to quality, because it does touch on Senator Craughwell's comment around outcomes and, and what we're actually measuring with regards to quality education, that it's not just about access, it's about really what the long-term impact that we're having. I might hand over to Father Bird perhaps to comment on that with regards to how we're able to measure kind of quality education and what that really looks like in practice with regards to SDG 4.
Yes, thank you. We've found access was important with free education. As more and more students began to join the education program, we hit the quality issue. And the quality education program is based around a quality teacher. Now, how in fragile contexts can we get quality teaching? Mission Cara supported us in adopting an integrated model. So after a secondary education, we had an online university program which trained teachers. And it's not a scholarship model that sent a person away out of their community, which is very expensive. But we trained locally using online university programs for training teachers. So they taught and they were learning and becoming educated teachers in their community, not sent away for 4 years, possibly never to return. So quality education can be accessed through online university systems, and it builds hope for the teenage girls especially, that I can become a teacher. And in particular with girls, parents are wanting them to be safe, and they're safe at home sometimes, at school, and in teaching, a very, very well regarded role in the community, and it provides really positive role models. So there are university online systems that are providing teacher education. We've benefited from that, and it has grown the quality of our education program, because we're not just asking for volunteers, we're not just having a secondary graduate, we are having someone who's trained. So that's been a very significant part for us to bring quality education to our migrant education program, online university.
Father Bird. One other question I suppose I think that came around initially was around what examples there are of other countries that are doing well in this regard, or that we can learn from perhaps of different initiatives that have been introduced that have been quite successful. And I'll hand over to Lorenza perhaps to address that.
Thank you. I actually don't want to talk about other countries. I would like to stay focused on Nigeria because, yeah, the picture is very grim from Nigeria, but actually with PLAN, we are working to improve the situation, and we are especially targeting out-of-school children. As you have heard, there are 20% of the out-of-school children in the world are in Nigeria, and we are targeting those children through EU funding. We have developed an accelerated education curriculum that has been approved by the Ministry of Nigeria and has been approved for rollout country-wise. And we are hoping to bring back to school as many children as possible. Children that weren't in school before COVID, children that aren't coming back to school after COVID. So we are piloting the curriculum in a program that is currently ongoing. And we have found that we actually can cover all the children that want to go back to school. So we also seen that organizing the courses, training the teachers, and organizing the courses in facilities that are safe with a number of students per teacher that are no more than 45 children per teacher, as the guidelines say, that's best practice. We have seen that not only the children learn, but also they don't want to go back to primary school when they have learned enough to actually be reintegrated, because unfortunately, primary school doesn't allow them to have the same level of protection, the same level of quality of education that we are providing them in those courses. So that is a new challenge that now we are trying to solve. But that links to the issue of quality education, but that also shows that there are still hope, and even in countries and in contexts that are getting worse by the year, because when we started the program in the northeast Nigeria, the security wasn't good, but definitely wasn't as bad as it is now. But still, we are still managing to get success. And we are working with primary school, we are working with 123 primary school, and we are managing to get the children back to school and managing to teach them as best as we possibly can with the infrastructure that we have and with the great teacher, as you were mentioning before, that there are in Nigeria, because they are qualified and good teachers. So I don't know if this answered the question, but I hope it brings some hope.
I think it also demonstrates, Deputy Flanagan, it demonstrates how flexible funding can really allow for, pilot programs to be introduced that are adapted to local circumstances or the changing context in many of the places in which we work. I might actually...
It also demonstrates, if you don't mind me cutting across, it also demonstrates how you can actually turn a really challenging negative into a positive.
Yes. Yeah.
Thank you for that. Sorry.
Thank you. I might hand over to Dirshay in Somalia, just with regards to the question around the drop-off of girls in school. I think there was a specific question around, comparative to boys, where do we see that drop-off happening, and what are some of the ways in which, from your example in Somalia, which has been quite successful in retaining girls in school, some of the measures that have been taken to retain girls in those challenging circumstances.
Thank you. Yeah, actually, we have come from a long way of getting that number of girls into school. Initially, when we started the program in 1993, I remember we had very small number of percentage girls attending school. And mostly it's coming, there was the Civil War was actually in the peak at the time. And, the understanding of the people of sending girls to school was actually very low, I will say, at the time. But then also, people in our culture, they didn't actually they were not actually kind of used to send girls into school. So from there we tried our best to encourage parents and CECs. We built the community education committees who were managing, because at the time there was no government at all in Somalia. And what we have been dealing with, we were dealing directly with the community. We established community education committees, we gave them training, and then we also gave them awareness raising so that they encourage parents to send their girls. Still, there is a long way to go, but then we have reached that percentage of in between 40% of girls now attending those schools supported by concern. One of the actually approaches that we used is that we have recruited female teachers, which was actually also not existent at the time. We have, when we were recruiting the teachers, I remember we allocated their portion for them, female contenders to apply, a number of 50% of the school teachers. So that's how these teachers become models for these girls, and parents then started sending their girls to school.
Very much, and I think it reiterates what Laban mentioned also of the need for female educators as being one of the key areas that we need in terms of driving girls' education. I might hand over to Breed with regard to the question for Afghanistan. I know the Concern are working at the moment in Afghanistan and probably have a good perspective on the situation there. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Yes, for Afghanistan, it's a bit like Dirshay was explaining where Somalia was at. Concern's approach to education has evolved over the years, and it's become a lot more community approach. And like Deputy Craughwell was saying earlier, we just only used to look at numbers of children and not the quality. So over the years, we have developed that approach of working with community, with parents, with caregivers, with girls, boys, and then the whole teacher training, and right up where we can, up to national level. And that model, we are also trying to work to do that in Afghanistan with the support of Irish Aid. We are, in the areas that we're working in Afghanistan, able to access our education programme and able to deliver in that manner. There are other areas in Afghanistan that this permission is not allowed. So we are maximising on the permissions that we do have. I suppose maybe just to add, that Irish Aid is very flexible and we welcome that. But there are a number of donors who have sanctions against the current government in Afghanistan on education and on health. So we would encourage that whatever leveraging that Irish government can do to lift those sanctions, because we are really denying very fundamental basic human rights to children who have of their own no responsibility in contributing to this war, so they should not be denied their basic rights.
Sorry, Ms. Kerry, can I just ask you, the people who follow these debates, if you want, the last few words that you uttered here are extremely important, and that is the impact that sanctions would have on your programme. So you're asking, if I heard you right, that sanctions, particularly in the education area, would be lifted?
Correct.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Breed. And I think there's perhaps one main question remaining, which was with regard to safe school places, and what are some of those kind of practical measures that are being put in place to enable, I suppose, the safety of children to be able to attend school on a regular basis. And I'll hand over to Eamon for that.
Okay, thank you very much. Yeah, well, we have, I suppose, particularly looked at this, and especially in relation to girls, and the safety in schools is a particular problem. In one respect, a lot of it comes down to teachers, and a lot of the time there has been a culture where corporal punishment is accepted and acceptable. So a big part of the challenge is to change this kind of cultural attitude. And a lot of the time, the laws may change or the policies may change, but the culture doesn't necessarily change. So a lot of the time, it's about trying to bring the teachers and the school leaders with you. And a lot of that starts outside the school, because the teachers aren't going to change their cultural attitudes if they're in a community or in a district or in a region where the prevailing attitude is that it's okay to inflict corporal punishment on students. I suppose there are other areas that the particular emphasis on safe schools would be about tackling gender-based violence in schools, student-on-student violence, which can occur, very much engaging family support and engaging communities, improving sanitary infrastructure for girls, which is often a kind of a flashpoint of difficulty that causes girls to leave school. And then things like using school infrastructure, improving school infrastructure. There are times, and we actually came up in a briefing that we had with the committee in 2019, I think it was, where dormitories are necessary. And they bring their own challenges, both in terms of cost and in terms of protection. But sometimes in the wider kind of chaotic environment, they're the only option. So I think a lot of the time it depends on the context and changing attitudes, behaviours and policies with school leadership. And then one of the I suppose a flagship programme we would have in Mission Cara is that in South Africa, the there's a project that we support through some of our members, which is looking at improving school behaviours and addressing violence across all the Catholic schools in South Africa, and learning from each other about what works. But crucially, not just sticking to those Catholic schools, it's also linked in with the ministry and with the strategic leadership unit in the ministry to see what kind of practices work best and in what kinds of locations, so that they can be brought in across all the state system. And that's the kind of educational system strengthening that they're trying to model in the Catholic schools, but then bring out wider to all the schools.
Just on the security issue in school, we've seen in particularly parts of Africa where young men as young as 10 or 11 years of age are running around the place with Kalashnikovs, and violence seems to be the name of the game for them. Do you envisage a situation where you may need to have armed guards around the school to allow for a safe environment? I know that the two things are mutually repugnant, if you want, but the important thing is to get quality education in a safe environment. Do you see any need for that?
I can't imagine that kind of a context, because what really works is where the education is embedded in the local community, responds to the relevance for the local community and the demand for education in the local community. And it has to be tailored to the cultural context. Sometimes you may want to challenge, or sometimes you may want the cultural context to change with you, but I can't imagine a situation where a kind of securitized approach would be. It would be about building trust, about building relationships, and maybe bringing in some things like safe cycle routes to school, safe walking routes to school, negotiating with local elders and tribal leaders to create community approaches that tackle community problems, rather than a securitized approach.
Okay, I'm going to wind towards a conclusion, and I want to thank everybody on behalf of the Joint Committee for joining us, and indeed for your submissions and for the comprehensive manner in which you dealt with members' questions. As I said at the outset, this is an area that we have indicated will be something of a specialist topic for us during the course of the year, and upon which we intend to produce a report. And this engagement this afternoon has been really important to us and really informative. And I think it's one that we will be reverting to. I'm going to let you in, Joanne, for a final comment. But before I do, I want to thank your colleagues. I want to thank Lorenzo and Eamon and Breed for being with us. And I really want to express the appreciation of the committee members to Father Frank Bird in New Zealand, to Laban in Nigeria, and to Dersha in Somalia. You know, oftentimes we look on technology from a negative perspective, but this is, you know, this afternoon we've seen the joys of technology, and thank you for joining us, and thank you for your contribution.
Chairman, might I ask, particularly in relation to Ms Kennedy's point about sanctions, that the committee write to the department and ask that we make representation about the lifting of sanctions for education?
Well, we'll certainly include reference to that, but I want to, by way of concluding comment, acknowledge what Deputy Brady has said earlier when he proposed or indicated a proposal that we would accept the recommendations as put forward. And I think we should do that. We can include reference to what Senator Craughwell has said, but albeit a very difficult political issue. But I do agree that we should look at options in terms of Afghanistan. However, you know, there are real and serious political concerns about any form of recognition of the regime, but I don't see any options on the table at the moment. And if you agree with that, I think it's something we can do by way of urging the government maybe to look at a suite of options that doesn't appear to be present at the moment in relation to Afghanistan. I note members of the media present. Now, I know we were restricted in terms of COVID, but I noticed members of the media present this afternoon, and I would remind them, as indeed I remind our guests, of the fact that this time last year, this committee produced something of an important comprehensive report in respect of COVID-19 and on vaccine equality and COVAX. And again, I think it was Deputy Brady made reference to it, and I think we should reiterate or indeed reaffirm our support for the contents of that report, which perhaps didn't find favour in the greater political debate than it did within the confines of this room. And I acknowledge Deputy Brady's reminder of that and agree with him. Acknowledging the important work of Irish Aid and indeed Mission Cara, as has been mentioned, I'm going to leave the final word to Jane Ann, and thank you for being with us.
Thank you, Chairman Flanagan. And I'd like just to thank the committee in general just for having us in today and to share with you, I think, some of the progress that has been made as a result of the Irish Aid funding and as a result of Ireland's support for education. And we really hope that this continues. And I think it's obvious, I think, from a lot of the contributions today, and I'd particularly like to thank those who joined us from Somalia, Nigeria and New Zealand today. It highlights that actually, regardless of where we are in the world, there are some common approaches that do work in terms of progressing education for those who are marginalised or progressing education from girls, particularly, you know, having a very much community-based approach, having very targeted programmes that are addressed and tailored towards girls to ensure their participation, and looking to see that, you know, outside of the educational systems, there are a number of groups that fall outside, including migrants and refugees, and that we need to ensure that they are brought in and that those who are the furthest behind do indeed get access to education and fulfil their right to quality education as well. So thank you very much.
Excellent, thank you very much. And thank you for being with us, and we look forward to continued engagement throughout the year. Thank you.